staple gun is going to be one of your primary tools for modern professional upholstery. So let's talk a little bit about what we're looking for in an ideal tool. The first thing is that we are going to look exclusively at pneumatic or air-driven models. Now I know for some of you there might be a little bit of intimidation talking about compressors and hoses, but we do want to get you around that learning curve. And the reason is these tools, compared to their electric or manual counterparts, are going to be less expensive, they're going to last longer, they take a lot less force to deploy the trigger, which will matter to your hands long term. And they're just going to be a much better tool for the job. So let's look first at the BEA 71 series, because that's the one that you'll see us use throughout the courses. If you could only purchase one staple gun for upholstery, this would be it. It's a German-built tool with loads of metal parts, and one of these could really feasibly last you the length of a career. When you want to open it up, we're just going to depress this button back here, slide it open, and pop our staples in the bottom, legs out. Slides closed, and we're all ready to go. Now you'll notice that two of these do not have any safety feature. I don't need to depress the nose to shoot a staple. I don't need to lift an additional lever back here. I can shoot this into furniture, into the air, or into my fingers if I was so desired. This is my preference for a tool, but you do want to treat it like the professional tool that it is, and you're responsible for reading your safety manual. Now for a less expensive version, let's look at, this is a Porter cable US 58. It is about half the price, and if you hold them side by side, you can kind of suspect why. This one is going to have more plastic parts compared to the BEA, so it's not likely to last as long, and it doesn't operate quite as smoothly. However, we do recommend this one a lot to our hobbyists, and this one is about 5 years old. It's made it through our classes, it's been dropped plenty of times, and it's still fully operational, so it is a good tool for the job, and it's going to shoot the same staples as that BEA model, which I do want to look at because that's a huge part of why we recommend tools specifically for upholstery. What these are going to shoot is a fine wire staple. This is a 1/2 inch, this is a 1/2 inch, and this is a 3/8 inch, which is plenty for securing fabric without destroying the frame. If you go to your hardware store, some of those are going to shoot staples that are just really unnecessarily aggressive for what we're doing with them. Now these two are both what we would call a standard nose. I do want to show you over here, I have one version of a long nose, and I think you can see where that name comes from, right? It's got just some extra length down in here. This one happens to be a Fasco, but you can get a BEA version, you can get a Porter cable version. These are going to be a price jump up, and in spite of that, this tool is more prone to jamming and breaking, probably just because that staple has to travel such a long path down this snout here. So in spite of the fact that this may seem like the more versatile tool, I wouldn't recommend it as a primary staple gun. Go with one of these two and treat yourself to this down the road when you run into a situation where you really need it. I do want to point out one other thing on this Fasco model, however, which is that it does have a safety latch. So back here, I cannot deploy the trigger unless I lift this extra lever. So if you prefer a tool with a safety, you can find versions that have that. Now any of these are not going to do anything right now because they are not hooked into my air system. But I have my favorite hose here, and I have a coupler on it that's going to join up with the end of my gun right here. But I do have to pull the collar back, and then I'll be able to clip them together, and when I release the collar, that will lock it into place. There you go, and now that's on there. You can hear that little hiss of air that tells you that my air system is actually charged right now. And I wanna make sure that my gun is pointed away from me and that my hand is not on the trigger. If you are uncomfortable with that, you may want to actually empty the gun before you attach the air. To reverse this, I'm gonna just do the opposite of what I did before. Push that coupler in, slide the collar back, and it'll pop right off for me. Now this takes a little bit of a hand strength in two directions. You will get the hang of it, but if at first you're having some trouble, try hooking this up before your air system is charged for the day, because then you won't have that air pressure pushing back against you. In terms of maintenance, a good staple gun should need very little. The one thing I might do every once in a while, monthly, or when I feel like my gun is maybe getting a little bit sticky, is to drop a little bit of oil back here in the air intake. This is the same oil that I have over in my sewing machine area, and a couple drops back here where the air hooks up. When I hook up my hose, now that air is going to carry that lubricant all the way through all the moving parts of my gun so it stays nice and operational. Like I said, you can put that on a regular maintenance schedule. You don't have to worry about it unnecessarily. A monthly is probably nice, or if you feel like it starts to miss staples every once in a while, try some oil. The last thing I want to talk about is some of these come fully assembled, but some of them do require a little assembly on your part. If you order that BEA, it's likely to show up with all your paperwork that you are going to read and just a threaded back. I cannot hook this up right now. There's a missing part, which your vendor may supply. You can see this is threaded to join my gun, and then this is the end that will pop into my air system. If this is not with your tool, you just take this to the hardware store, tell them what you're trying to do, and they're gonna be able to tell you what you need. Now I could go ahead and screw this right into the back, but with that air system, it's advisable to use a little bit of thread tape. That's that plastic thread tape you can get at any hardware store. And a little strip of that wrapped into the threads is just gonna help me get a nice airtight seal. Once I have that, I can start to screw it in. And then finish tightening with a tool. Now if you're not sure if you've got it tight enough, pop it onto your air system and see if you get any hisses. That one's good. If I heard a little hiss, I'd go a little tighter, and that can happen from time to time. Occasionally couplers can also wear out, but really once you get set up, you should be able to work for a good long time. And remember, if you're not sure what's up, you don't know what you need, you have questions, or you're feeling intimidated, pneumatic systems and air tools are not an upholstery thing, they're a general hardware thing. So walk into your nearby hardware store, start asking questions, and they're gonna be able to help you get going. Compressors are a really critical part of a modern upholstery shop, and you might be feeling a little intimidated or uncertain around them, and I hope that we can convince you that it is not as complicated as you might be thinking. Now, a large workroom might have a fairly complex pneumatic setup, but if you're one person getting started, I promise you can make it as simple as a very small compressor, a single hose, and a single staple gun. Now we've already looked at the air tools and why we want to use certain staple guns for upholstery. Now let's talk about hoses, fittings, and your compressor. So hoses are the piece of the system that's going to carry air from your compressor into your tools. And they do come in different lengths, different materials, different widths. We need a 1/4 inch inside diameter, which is the most common hose. Now I like just one of these light straight hoses, but you may prefer one of the tight curly ones. You might prefer a heavier hose. When we get all set up, we will actually hang our hose reels from the ceiling so that with students in here, we aren't tripping over them. But if it's just you, you certainly can run a short hose right across the floor. Be smart, look out for it. And that ties into length as well. You don't want the world's longest hose if you're working in the smallest space. Get as much length as you need, not a whole lot more, because you do not need a tripping hazard in your workroom. So once you've decided on your hose, you are probably going to have to add your fittings on. Let me scoot this down. And you can see in here the fittings that we have joined here. I have thread tape in there, just like I did when I started my staple gun. They just go together like Tinker Toys. And this is called a coupler. Our tools are going to use, there are industrial and automotive couplers. We're not teaching you to work on cars, so you know you need the industrial version. You can also use a universal, which should theoretically fit either, but we would recommend the industrial. So we've already looked at this. We slide that coupler on, and that connects to our air tool. But you do have to buy that and attach to your hose. Now at the other end, this is going to go into my compressor. So I need a fitting that will join that. This is going to go into my quick coupler on my compressor. That should look familiar because look, this would, we could make a closed loop here if we wanted. That joins to this, which is the same coupler I'll find on my compressor in a second here. And you can see that this was taped on as well. Little thread tape, and we're all set to go. Now that seems really straightforward. When you get to the hardware store, you're going to be like, Cynthia, there are a billion different fittings here. So if you're overwhelmed, if you can't figure out what you need, stop and ask somebody, you guys. Compressors are not an upholstery thing. They are just a basic hardware thing. And whoever's working at the hardware store is going to be able to help you with what you need. You show up, you go, I have this, help. And they're going to go, okay, you need that and you need that. Now let's take this over and we'll look at the compressor because that's the big part of this system. So first, let's talk about that connection since we just finished talking about fittings on our hoses. So my compressor already comes with a quick coupler. I don't have to do anything with that. I just have to get my hose to the right fitting so I can pop this in. I don't even have to pull the collar back. We just get to go straight in. You ready? Now we're all set. Now let's talk about that big central part of your pneumatic system, which is, of course, your air compressor. Now there is no limit to the price range on compressors that are out there, so that this can be really confusing and overwhelming, especially if you start asking around and you get everybody's opinion about what the best is and how big it needs to be and how loud it should be. But the first thing I want to tell you is that for upholstery, you really can operate with just about anything if you're running with one staple gun. And irregardless of what you spend, there are going to be some things that compressors share in common. So let's focus on that first. So we have a tank that holds our compressed air. That is definitely going to vary in size. We started with just about the smallest compressors we could find. We have since upgraded as we've added students, but that's going to hold our air. Now it's also going to have whatever pump design so that it can draw air in, right? We need to pull air into this and we need to compress it into that holding tank. Now what I want to show you here, these are a really key part that you need to be able to understand. We have two gauges here. This is my tank and this is my output. So this tells me what my tank pressure is at. And that one is set at the factory. I do not get to adjust that. That is based on the design. And I wouldn't want to mess with that even if I could. But when I turn the compressor on, my air pressure will go up and it will turn off at a predetermined level according to the factory, according to the design. Now when I come over here, this is my output pressure. And this I can set, and I need to set according to my tool. Now, if we read our staple gun guide, as I'm sure that you have, you'll know that they're set to run at 85 to 90 PSI, pounds per square inch. So that's what we're set at. But this little knob down here if I needed to adjust up or down, then I can tell this what I want my air tools to run at, and they are all different if I was doing sanding or painting or something else with my compressor. But this should stay consistent. As I start to use my tools, this is gonna stay at 90 because that's what I've set it at. And this over here, as I deplete the system of air, as I empty out my tank, this is gonna drop. And when it drops to a certain point, my compressor will kick on and it will drive the pressure back up to that preset point again. So let us have a demonstration of this. Here's my power switch. So when I flip this on, I'm sure that my tank is low enough that it's going to kick on immediately, and we'll watch when it turns off. Ready? All right, so that is the factory preset. When my tank decides that's enough, we're gonna turn off. And let's go over here. You can see that didn't change, right? Because that's my output. That just stays consistent, 90, what I set it at. Now, a couple things about the noise level on a compressor. Most of them are pretty loud. And one thing you can do is, I think my compressor is set to kick back on, I don't know, what was that at? 110, 115, when this is gonna decide, okay, we need to turn back on and we need to recharge the system. But really, since my tool runs at 90, I could let this get all the way down to about 85, maybe even 80, before it's going to give me any performance issues with my tools. So at this point, I could actually just flip my compressor off and work, probably all day, without having to recharge the system. So just know that you can actually kind of bypass that reset and turn the whole thing off. Now, I don't think we talked about what happens if you have this too high or too low. So if I run this too low, or if say my tank pressure drops way down to 80 or 85, my staple gun will start to misfire. It just isn't enough air to properly run the tool. So when I notice that starting to happen, great, I'll come back and I'll turn my compressor back on, charge it back up. If I run this too high, what I can actually do is damage the tool. It's not designed to be shooting staples at 120 or 130. I may damage the tool, and I may be punching through materials with my staples. So that's why that is important. Now, the other thing about these compressors and their noise level is that they are, as a rule, pretty loud, okay? Mine is kind of midway. There's definitely louder compressors, and there are quieter compressors, but none of them are truly silent. So you want to look at what's your situation with your neighbors, with acceptable noise levels. For upholstery, your compressor usually doesn't have to run that often, but a $120 quarter cable is going to sound like a lawnmower in your space. So if quiet is important to you, check out California brand. Those are a nice quiet model for upholstery. And be very careful. I know if you go online, you can read a lot about kind of some DIY soundproofing. I want to caution you to just be very, very careful with that, because your compressor does need sufficient air space around it to cool off and to draw in air. So anything that you do that the manufacturer hasn't recommended, you are doing at your own risk. So if you're looking for quiet, really look at those decibel levels to guide you in that decision. All right, finally, let's talk about safety and maintenance. Now, at the end of every day, you absolutely want to turn your compressor off in case a hose should rupture and that tank says, oh no, we have to turn on, we're trying to fill, we're trying to fill, we're trying to fill, we're trying to fill. And this does have an overheat mechanism, so it should turn itself off if that happens, but we just want to make sure that we turn our system off in case something like that should happen in the middle of the night. And in fact, my dad was quite adamant that we should tell you guys, even if you leave for lunch, turn your compressor off in case you have a good time and you decide not to come back for the day. The other thing is that there is water in the air, so your compressor can and will take on moisture over time. And your tank should have a place where you can drain it. they're going to recommend that you do that daily as well. Mine happens to be underneath, so I'm not going to drain that for you right now, but you want to be doing that regularly. And where do we learn how to do that? In our user's manual, which we are going to read carefully. One more thing, some compressors do take oil, but if you are new to using a pneumatic system, make life easy and just look for an oil-free model. There are plenty out there, including that California brand that we like for the low noise levels. Any other questions that you have? Where are you going to go? The hardware store. All right, they know everything you need to know and a whole lot more that you don't even need for upholstery. And again, as your business grows, you can choose to upgrade, buy the compressor of your dreams, but we literally started the funky little chair with two $120 Porter cable compressors. So you can get it done on the cheap. Don't let that be the reason that you're afraid to start setting up your pneumatic system.